We'd anchored ropes at a sheer wall months earlier, barely noticeable from the street. I went in first, as usual, slipping silently into the fort ahead of everyone else, finding my assigned spot deep inside the tunnels. My job was simple: wait silently at a narrow junction, directing explorers toward the main path if they hesitated or got turned around. Once inside the fort, everything shifted. The air was always precisely 57 degrees Fahrenheit, no matter the season. And though the road was close, not even the rumble of trucks penetrated these walls. It was like entering a vacuum, utter stillness that pressed against your eardrums. There was a constant breeze, slight but noticeable, moving through the tunnels in gentle pulses, almost rhythmic, like slow breathing. I squeezed into my spot, a small recessed alcove cut into the brickwork, and waited. It was pitch black, no flashlights permitted, only touch and sound. Even after all these years, the place still unsettled me. The tunnels were narrow, tight enough that I had to tilt my shoulders sideways in some passages. Sound bounced strangely here. Footsteps seemed to echo behind rather than ahead, the acoustics tricking you into believing you were being followed. You'd stop, and for a second, there would always be one extra step, a lingering echo that unsettled everyone. It must have been at least half an hour of silent waiting when I first saw the faint glow down the corridor. I frowned. Somebody had broken the rule. Matches, maybe, or a tiny lighter. The dim flicker bobbed gently, rhythmic, like someone slowly pacing. But as I watched it approach, I realized something strange. There were no footsteps. None at all. Just that wavering light moving smoothly down the hallway, impossibly silent. It drew closer, closer, and then, without warning, the light blinked out. Complete darkness returned. I shifted uneasily, feeling a trickle of cold sweat slide down my spine. The hallway felt colder, emptier somehow, despite knowing rationally it couldn't have changed temperature, but my nerves were getting to me. I took a quiet breath to steady myself. That's when I felt it, a sudden slight warmth against my face, humid and human, a moist breath in the otherwise dry tunnel air. I froze completely, my muscles locking. There was something directly in front of me. I could smell it, a faint scent of sweat, damp earth, and old fabric, familiar and yet horribly out of place. Whoever, or whatever, stood there had stopped breathing. It knew I was there. My own breath trapped painfully in my chest as we both stood utterly still, neither daring to move. My pulse throbbed in my temples, deafening in the silence. I strained my ears desperately for some clue of movement. A shifting weight, a scrape, a breath. Nothing. Only silence and the suffocating closeness of the tunnel. Minutes passed like hours, my lungs beginning to burn. Finally, just as my chest spasmed for air, the warmth slowly receded. I exhaled silently, shuddering in relief, trying to convince myself it had only been a trick of my nerves or imagination. But I knew better. The air shifted again, the faint breeze returning to brush gently across my face. A minute later, a faint light again appeared, this time moving off toward the right, disappearing into another tunnel passage. Then darkness reclaimed the space once more. I was still trying to calm myself when I heard familiar heavy boots coming from the left passage, finally signaling the first of our explorers. He walked briskly, confident in the dark. As he approached, I stepped forward slightly, whispering instructions, guiding him toward the proper corridor. Before he left, though, curiosity compelled me to quietly ask a single question. "Who was first inside tonight?" I murmured, already half knowing the answer. He paused briefly, his voice hushed but certain. "No one. I was the first one in." My blood went cold, the certainty of his words chilling me deeper than the constant, oppressive cold of Fort de la Chartreuse. He moved on quietly into the dark, leaving me alone again, waiting for the others, with the unbearable sensation of eyes on me, unseen yet present somewhere deep within the tunnels. After that encounter in the narrow passage, I tried to dismiss it. My heart was still beating too fast, and each careful step echoed louder in my ears than before. Maybe it was just paranoia, or perhaps sensory confusion from the dark. Regardless, I didn't have the luxury to dwell on it. Not here, deep beneath Fort de la Chartreuse, guiding the rest of the group forward. We regrouped in what we called the chapel. It wasn't a real chapel, just a vaulted chamber with a collapsed ceiling, exposing patches of the night sky and scattering faint moonlight on moss-covered rubble. The others were arriving in small clusters, whispering nervously, some laughing off the adrenaline, others tense and silent. I decided to briefly mention what happened, just in case someone else had seen or heard something similar. When I did, a few laughed quietly, assuming it was some trick of the senses. But a few faces tightened, eyes flicking nervously around the shadowed chamber. I didn't push further. The dark played games after all, and even seasoned explorers could become unnerved down here. Then Celine, one of the newer explorers, stepped forward. Her voice was low, cautious. "There's something I found," she whispered. "A tunnel, just off the west corridor. It looked old, but I don't think we've ever seen it before." I frowned. I knew every passage in this fort, or thought I did, yet I couldn't place the tunnel she described. The group murmured quietly, curiosity tinged with caution. We agreed, hesitantly, to check it out. She led us down a familiar path until we reached a collapsed brick wall. Rubble partly cleared away, exposing a cramped opening into darkness. One by one, we squeezed through. Inside, the air was colder, staler, pressing down heavily on my shoulders. The tunnel was low and narrow, lined with bricks now slick with condensation. I ran my fingertips along them, catching something rough and jagged. We stopped to examine the walls. Names. Dozens of names etched crudely into the brickwork, alongside numbers, prisoner IDs perhaps. German names, dated from 1943 and 1944. The fort had always carried rumors of prisoners held during the occupation, but this was the first tangible proof I'd ever seen. Theo stepped up beside me, tracing a finger along the wall. His voice shook slightly. "My family name's here," he said quietly, pointing to a faded carving. "My grandfather was in the resistance. He was captured, held somewhere in Liège before escaping." A chill crawled over my skin. I tried not to think too deeply about what that meant. But as I looked further along, something caught my eye. Fresh marks, clearly recent, not softened by dust or age. Leaning close, I deciphered them easily, heart tightening painfully in my chest. "What is the light?" The scratches were frantic, uneven, almost desperate. Before I could speak, a noise echoed down the passage, a steady rhythmic thud of heavy boots. The group froze instantly. I shone my flashlight beam down the tunnel instinctively, revealing only empty darkness. The footsteps continued, growing louder, but there was nobody visible, no shape emerging from the blackness. Then the beam flickered and went out. In sudden darkness again, panic began rippling quietly through the group. Celine was breathing fast, whispering something fearful to the others. Theo gripped my arm tightly, holding his breath. Then we heard something else, a faint, steady breathing. It sounded as if someone stood directly behind us, a breath damp and audible. Yet when I turned, I felt only empty space and cold air. Theo pulled urgently at my sleeve, guiding me back toward the chapel. We stumbled through the narrow opening, trying not to run outright. Behind us, the breathing faded, but not entirely. It lingered, quietly present, following just at the edge of hearing. When we finally emerged back into the chapel, I bent over, trying to regain composure. That was when I noticed something new. A weathered leather notebook lying on the rubble, clearly old, but somehow untouched by the moisture or mold covering everything else. Theo hesitated before picking it up, turning carefully through brittle pages until he reached the last written entry, dated April 1944. He shined a small penlight on the faded handwriting and began quietly reading. "It no longer needs light to see. It moves with memory. It follows breath." Theo looked up at me slowly, eyes wide in horror. The sound of footsteps returned, slow, steady, purposeful, moving through the darkness towards us. My pulse thundered in my ears as the footsteps drew closer. They echoed through the chapel, deliberate and steady. The others began whispering frantically, but I raised my hand sharply, signaling absolute silence. Every sound mattered now, every breath counted. I motioned quickly toward the exit passage, and we moved as one, stumbling carefully through the darkness. The tunnel leading to our rope and climbing gear seemed endless this time, the walls closing in tighter than before, brushing harshly against my shoulders. When we finally reached the base of the wall where we'd left our equipment, I felt blindly for the rope. my stomach turning cold when my fingers grasped only empty air. I checked again, then again, heart hammering. Nothing. The rope was gone. I whispered to Theo and Celine, urgently asking if either had seen or taken the rope down earlier. Both shook their heads, breathing heavily in panic. We were trapped. A faint metallic scraping sound echoed from somewhere deep in the tunnels behind us. It was moving closer. I recalled an old rumor about a collapsed artillery passage at the back of the fort that led toward the rail line. We'd never verified it, but now there was no choice. "There's another way out," I whispered hoarsely. "Follow me and stay quiet." We moved slowly, cautiously deeper into the fort, guided only by fingertips tracing along damp bricks. The familiar, gentle breeze faded away entirely as we pushed deeper, replaced by thick, oppressive stillness. The air felt stagnant, suffocating, heavy enough to slow each step. We paused occasionally, holding our breath, listening carefully. Every single time, one extra footstep seemed to echo quietly behind us. After one stop, I heard Celine whispering in panic, "Did you hear breathing?" I froze, straining my ears. There it was again, a quiet, rhythmic breathing sound, wet and warm, uncomfortably close. Every nerve in my body screamed in fear, muscles rigid, afraid to even exhale. Then suddenly Celine gasped sharply, and a sudden shuffle of movement echoed in the darkness beside me. "Celine?" Theo whispered desperately. Silence. Nothing replied. Celine was gone, simply taken, pulled silently into darkness. We hurried on, hearts racing, hardly daring to breathe, every shallow gasp painfully loud. Theo was shaking beside me, his hand trembling uncontrollably. I felt my chest tightening, the urge to breathe deeply overwhelming, almost unbearable. Each time one of us inhaled loudly, the faint footsteps behind grew closer. As we reached a tight bend in the corridor, Theo faltered. His breathing had become ragged, punctuated by quiet, fearful sobs. I turned quickly, trying to steady him, but just as my hand reached his shoulder, something shifted abruptly beside us. Theo's breath caught harshly, and then he disappeared, torn from my grip so swiftly that I stumbled forward into empty air. I held my breath, body rigid, muscles screaming with tension, listening desperately for Theo. Silence. Then, horrifyingly close, slow, careful breathing returned, brushing warm air across my neck. My skin crawled violently. I bit down on my tongue to stifle a scream, tasting blood. Carefully, inch by inch, I backed toward the passage, holding my breath tightly in my chest. Step by agonizing step, I navigated blindly forward, every second a battle against my body's desperate need for oxygen. My head spun from lack of air, lungs burning painfully. Finally, the tunnel turned sharply, and I felt cool night air rush against my face from somewhere ahead. In sheer desperation, I pushed forward blindly, shoulders scraping against jagged bricks, ignoring the pain, lungs about to burst. My hands grasped at moss-covered stone, and suddenly I was out, collapsing onto damp grass beneath an open sky. The air flooded my lungs painfully, sharp and cold. Gasping, shivering uncontrollably, I twisted around, staring wide-eyed back at the dark opening from which I'd emerged. Nothing followed me. The tunnel sat quiet, empty, black as a grave. Days later, I returned with a small team during daylight. I'd contacted local authorities, insisting they investigate and close off the dangerous sections of the fort. As we moved slowly through the tunnels again, the beams of our flashlights revealed familiar corridors, now strangely harmless, under the glow of bright LED bulbs. When we reached the chapel, my heart skipped sharply. On the wall near where we had discovered the old notebook was a fresh carving. It stood out clearly against the older scratches, deep and jagged, the edges rough with brick dust. I still breathe. Below it, scratched faintly, almost gently, I read my own full name. I've spent more of my life underground than I'd like to admit. It started as a teenage dare, exploring drainage tunnels, abandoned mines, and the forgotten corridors beneath our quiet town in northern Pennsylvania. My friends Trevor and Zeke were always with me, addicted to the rush of squeezing through tight spaces and the strange allure of places no one was ever meant to see. But over the years, adulthood happened, and our expeditions became rare. Jobs, families, responsibilities, life pulled us apart. It was Trevor who suggested one last exploration, a final nostalgic crawl. He mentioned a drain pipe he'd spotted a couple years ago in Wildcat Hollow, a remote forested area near Tioga State Forest. It had been poking out of a steep hillside, partially hidden by trees and bushes, forgotten and rusted. Curiosity reignited the fire, and we quickly agreed. The forest around Wildcat Hollow felt thicker than usual as we hiked in. It was late afternoon, with sunlight filtering weakly through a dense canopy. Moss-covered stones lined the ground, and the air carried that familiar damp, earthy smell we knew all too well. Finally, Trevor pointed ahead. I squinted to see a dull glint of corrugated metal, half buried and cloaked in vines. "This has to be it," Trevor said, clearing brush aside. Zeke looked hesitant but nodded. We unpacked our headlamps and tested them. The beams flickered weakly in the daylight, hardly comforting. Then, one by one, we crawled inside. The pipe was narrower than it looked. My elbows scraped against the rusted walls as I crawled on hands and knees. Immediately the temperature dropped, the air heavy and stale. Within a few dozen feet, daylight had entirely vanished behind us. We were submerged in complete darkness except for the thin cones of our lamps illuminating bits of rust, grime, and cobwebs. "How far does this go?" Zeke whispered, his voice echoing weirdly. "About 600 feet to a junction," Trevor answered quietly, leading us deeper. I tried to focus only on the rhythm of crawling, ignoring how tight and oppressive the walls felt around me. We pressed on in silence, breaths loud and shallow in the enclosed space. The pipe seemed to narrow gradually, pushing down on my shoulders, squeezing until my heart pounded. Claustrophobia was always there, lurking, but something felt especially off this time. More than usual anxiety, deeper. Finally, after what seemed like forever, we spilled out into a larger concrete room, a junction point typical of storm drains. Circular walls stretched upward to a rusted manhole cover far above, dripping water forming puddles on the floor. I inhaled deeply, relieved to stretch out, and turned slowly, illuminating 3 smaller pipes branching off. "Looks like we've got options," Trevor said nervously. One pipe was marked with a faded splash of red paint, probably left by a maintenance crew decades ago. Another looked partially collapsed. The third was small but open, just barely wide enough to slither through on your stomach. Zeke eyed it warily. "I'm not sure," Zeke started. "Come on, Zeke," Trevor laughed softly, forcing enthusiasm. "We used to do way worse than this." Zeke hesitated, then sighed, giving in. "Fine, I'll lead this one, but if it gets any tighter, I'm turning around." "Deal," I whispered back, though something about the pipe unsettled me. A black tunnel impossibly narrow. Zeke went first, sliding onto his stomach. Trevor followed, then me. Within moments, the oppressive weight of concrete surrounded me again, closer than ever. Each breath tasted stale, mingling with rust and moisture. My elbows scraped painfully against gritty concrete, but I kept crawling, feeling trapped by my own choice. We made slow progress until Zeke suddenly stopped. "There's something here," he called back, voice echoing strangely. "Blocking the pipe. I think it's a dead animal." "Can you get past it?" Trevor urged impatiently. "We can't exactly turn around here." I heard Zeke breathing quicker, shallow gasps of disgust. "Oh God, I don't know. It feels gross. Warm." "Warm?" My stomach churned. "Just go over it quickly, Zeke." He groaned, retching quietly. Fine. I heard scraping as he crawled over, his voice panicky. "Oh God, it's all over me. Hurry up." My heart pounded as I moved forward. In the dim circle of my lamp, I saw it, a dark, shapeless lump filling half the pipe. My stomach clenched. As my body brushed against it, I felt a sickening warmth, my fingers sinking slightly into the mass, fur-like and slimy. The smell hit me next, like rotten meat mixed with chemicals, burning my throat. I fought the urge to vomit and forced myself quickly over the foul obstacle. Trevor cursed softly behind me. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know," I said weakly. "Maybe a trapped raccoon or something." "That thing didn't feel like a raccoon," Trevor whispered harshly. "Jesus." "Just keep moving," Zeke pleaded ahead, voice thin and shaky. We pressed forward deeper into the cramped darkness. My mind raced. Something wasn't right. Dead animals were common underground, but this felt different. It felt wrong. Zeke suddenly paused again, voice trembling. Guys, something's up ahead. It smells worse, like something died down here. I see a shape. A body maybe. My blood ran cold. Trevor began to whisper rapidly, terrified. We should turn back. Now. Zeke gagged violently ahead. It's too close. I can't move any closer. I need out, now. The pipe felt impossibly small, trapping us in darkness with that horrible smell. Whatever lay ahead wasn't something we wanted to see. Panic surged through me. Back out, I said urgently, fighting the desperation rising in my voice. We're done. No one argued. We scrambled backward clumsily, feeling trapped and vulnerable. As we passed the lump again, my lamp caught its wet surface, reflecting dark crimson mixed with clumps of black fur. My stomach turned violently. I hurried past, certain it moved slightly under my touch. No, it was just nerves. We reached the junction room again and climbed frantically back toward the original entrance pipe, squeezing desperately toward daylight. Sunlight poured through the opening as we crawled out, coughing and shaking, covered in that foul darkness. Never again, Zeke gasped, peeling off his shirt. Bloody residue clung to his skin, thick and foul-smelling. I stared at my own trembling hands. Agreed. We knew better now. Some things were better left buried deep underground. We stood for a while in the clearing outside the pipe, shaking, breathing fresh air like we'd forgotten how good it felt. The late afternoon sun was a welcome shock after the suffocating darkness. I tried to convince myself it was just a dead raccoon, something ordinary and explainable, but my gut wouldn't accept it. Whatever we had crawled over in that tunnel wasn't anything natural. Trevor rubbed his palms against his jeans, pacing anxiously. Zeke's face was pale, eyes wide with something close to shock. What the hell was that? Trevor finally broke the silence, voice shaking. He peeled off his jacket, revealing streaks of blackish-red sludge smeared along his arms. The same muck covered my own clothing, making my stomach twist again. Maybe just an animal caught down there, Zeke muttered, sounding unconvinced himself. I glanced at the narrow pipe entrance. Animals don't usually feel warm like that, and the smell, it was wrong. Trevor grimaced, looking at his hands. I need to get this off me. We moved quickly down toward a stream nearby, trying to scrub off the grime. The water turned a rusty, oily red as it washed over our skin. Zeke was quiet, his breath shallow and shaky. We should leave, he whispered. Forget this ever happened. I agreed silently, but Trevor hesitated, looking back toward the pipe entrance. We never turned away before, he said quietly. This is supposed to be our last run. Are we really going to let it end like this? Zeke stared at him in disbelief. You didn't feel what I felt. You didn't see that thing ahead. It looked like a body, but worse. Trevor clenched his jaw. Maybe your eyes were playing tricks. We can't leave without knowing, I heard myself say, surprising even myself. The need to confirm what lay ahead was suddenly powerful. It gnawed at my rational thoughts. We need to be sure. Zeke looked at me sharply, fear mixed with disbelief, but Trevor nodded slowly. We go back. We see clearly what's down there, then we're done, forever. Zeke looked between us, hesitant, before reluctantly agreeing. The dread in my gut deepened as we approached the pipe again. We squeezed back inside, the tunnel colder this time, air thicker. It was harder now, knowing what waited ahead. Still, we crawled forward, our breathing rapid and ragged. When we reached the junction room again, the dripping water echoed louder, the space darker somehow. Zeke stared silently at the narrow pipe ahead, visibly shaking, but he crawled forward again, driven more by grim determination than curiosity now. I followed, feeling trapped once more, the darkness pressing from all sides. After several long minutes, Zeke froze, whispering back urgently. The smell's worse. God, it's awful. I can't breathe. We were close enough now that I smelled it too, a putrid odor, thick with decay, chemical-like and burning my throat. Nausea gripped me instantly. I see it clearly, Zeke hissed, barely audible. There's something sitting up ahead, against the wall. It looks human. Are you sure? Trevor whispered frantically behind me. Yes, but the arms are too long, twisted weirdly. It's slumped like it's dead. Zeke's voice was panicked now, higher pitched, strained. "We have to get out, now!" I felt frozen, trapped between Trevor blocking the way back and Zeke ahead, panic rising in my chest. I strained to see beyond Zeke's silhouette, my weak headlamp illuminating just enough of the shape ahead. It was slumped against the tunnel wall, clearly humanoid, but the limbs were distorted, overly thin, and extended. The figure's skin glistened wetly under our lights, slick and strangely reflective. The pool beneath it was thick, dark, and shimmering like oil. My stomach lurched again as the smell intensified. "Go back," I urged quietly. "Now." We began scrambling backward in clumsy, terrified bursts, the tight pipe making movement difficult. My heart hammered painfully. Trevor cursed rapidly behind me, breath shallow. I could hear Zeke whispering urgently to himself, words unintelligible. As we reached the mass again, the thing we had crawled over, I paused instinctively. My beam flickered over it once more. My breath caught sharply, its surface quivered slightly, something shifting just beneath the blackened, matted fur. I pressed against the pipe wall, trying desperately not to touch it again. But the tunnel was too tight, and I felt the sickening sensation of my chest brushing against its warm, twitching surface. A quiet, wet sound emerged from it, a rasping, guttural hiss. My pulse raced as panic surged through me. "Move faster!" I shouted, voice raw with fear. We burst back into the junction room and scrambled toward the exit pipe, climbing awkwardly toward daylight again. We emerged gasping, choking, and sweating heavily into the fading sunlight. No one spoke for a moment as we lay on the ground, shivering uncontrollably. "That wasn't human," Zeke finally whispered, voice hollow and strained. "It wasn't animal either." Trevor stared blankly ahead, visibly trembling. I saw it move. The thing on the floor. It moved, didn't it? I nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the dark pipe entrance, now a gaping hole of dread. Yeah, it did. We stood silently, the fading daylight bringing fresh terror rather than comfort. None of us knew what we'd disturbed, what had lurked quietly underground. But as we turned away from Wildcat Hollow, one thing was clear. Some places weren't meant to be explored, and some things were better left hidden, forever. Sleep didn't come easily after Wildcat Hollow. Every night I tossed restlessly, haunted by the memory of that tunnel, replaying the sensation of crawling over something that moved. Something warm, fleshy, and alien. My dreams twisted into vivid nightmares, dark corridors, muffled breathing, and those distorted limbs we had glimpsed in the shadows. I'd wake soaked in sweat, gasping in panic, convinced that foul odor lingered faintly in my room. Days passed, but the anxiety didn't fade. Then, about a week after the incident, I got a frantic call from Zeke. "I'm sick, man," he whispered over the phone, voice shaking. "Really sick. Rash all over my body, burning like hell." "You went to the doctor?" I asked, my stomach tightening uneasily. "They're running tests. Some kind of chemical exposure, infection. No one knows yet. Trevor has it too, but not as bad." His voice faltered. "Do you have anything?" I glanced at my arms and chest reflexively, noticing nothing yet but suddenly feeling itchy, paranoid. "Not yet. Maybe it's because you guys touched it first." "God, I hope so," Zeke murmured. "Stay safe. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't right." I hung up, anxiety thickening inside me. The next day, Trevor messaged about nightmares of his own. Visions of crawling through tunnels that narrowed until the walls pressed tight. And something faceless dragged itself toward him through the dark. My own nightmares intensified, filled with whispers and scratching noises I couldn't escape. After days of trying to ignore it, curiosity won out. I decided to dig deeper, desperate for some kind of explanation. My searches turned up vague references to construction projects around Tioga State Forest in the early 1970s. I found old articles describing abandoned developments, housing projects abruptly halted due to unspecified complications. Contractors had fled the site, reports said, mentioning underground issues, hazards the county quietly buried. No specifics, only hints of problems beneath Wildcat Hollow. The dread in me deepened. Was this connected to what we'd found? One evening, unable to shake my obsessive thoughts, I unpacked my gear to clean it properly, determined to erase every last trace of that place. As I scrubbed my knee pads under warm water, something caught my eye, dark strands tangled in the Velcro straps. I carefully plucked them free, holding them up to the light. The strands were thick, coarse, and strangely translucent, like insect hairs. Nausea churned again in my gut. They didn't belong to any animal I knew. Disturbed, I sealed the strands in a plastic bag, then immediately threw it in the trash, washing my hands until they were raw. A few days later, Zeke texted, "Out of the hospital. Rash cleared, but doctors have no idea what caused it. Never going underground again." Trevor agreed, exhausted by sleepless nights and a lingering dread that neither of us could shake. Yet despite our vows, I felt drawn back to Wildcat Hollow, one last look to reassure myself that nothing had followed us out. I returned alone, anxiety spiking with every step closer to the pipe. As I approached, I saw that nature was reclaiming the hillside. Vines and roots had partially hidden the entrance. The pipe itself looked like it had partially collapsed inward, twisted by some unseen force. I stood there, heart pounding, scanning the surroundings. Near the entrance, beneath thick moss, something caught my eye, a rusted metal sign partially obscured by vegetation. Hesitantly, I brushed away the moss and stared at the faded words stamped into the metal. Subdrain 4B, Biological Isolation Zone, do not disturb. My blood froze. Biological isolation. Isolation from what? From whom? My mind flashed back to the warm, twitching mass we'd crawled over. Whatever it was, someone had known about it. Someone who'd buried the secret deep underground decades ago, hoping it would never surface. I stepped back, feeling a deep chill sink into my bones. As I turned to leave, something stirred behind the pipe opening, a faint, wet rustle. I didn't dare look back. Panic surged through me, and I hurried away, faster and faster, driven by a primal instinct to flee from whatever still lingered there. When I reached my car, breath ragged, I knew with absolute certainty I'd never return. Some things were never meant to be disturbed, never meant to see daylight. Wildcat Hollow had shown me the cost of curiosity, the horrifying truth that some secrets were buried for a reason. As a glaciologist, my fieldwork often took me to the most isolated and harsh landscapes Iceland had to offer. That September, my assignment brought me to Langanese, a remote, windswept peninsula stretching into the Arctic Ocean like a weathered finger pointing to nowhere. The nearest paved road was 10 kilometers away, civilization even farther. My home for weeks had been a modified Land Rover Defender, crammed with field equipment, dried meals, and topographical maps. Most of my days were consumed with trudging through cold, sodden terrain, taking measurements, and documenting erosion patterns along the coastline. One particularly gray afternoon, while referencing an outdated survey map, I spotted something unusual, a tiny rectangular marker labeled simply Farm. Curious and mildly bored, I decided to investigate. After nearly an hour's hike through misty bogland and brittle moss, the farmhouse appeared, small and stark, perched atop a bluff overlooking the lead-colored sea. The wooden exterior had weathered to a dull gray, paint long since peeled away by relentless northern winds. The structure looked abandoned, forgotten by time, but despite its obvious age, it was strangely intact, without the typical signs of vandalism or graffiti that often marred remote buildings. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching through coarse grass and sheep bones bleached white by years in the sun. The farmhouse's silence seemed absolute. As I reached the front door, a mild unease settled in my gut, a familiar sense of vulnerability that comes from being utterly alone in the wilderness. Inside, the air felt heavy, cold, and stale. The interior was sparse, old wooden furniture, dusty floors, and pale walls bare save for a faded homemade poster taped above a rusty stove. Squinting in the dimness, I read the text. Family Gathering, 1982. Beside the stove lay a pile of sheep ear tags, yellowed and brittle, relics of a forgotten past. The kitchen smelled faintly of mold and sea coal. Intrigued by the peculiar preservation, I began taking photographs, documenting the strange assortment of household items left behind. A kettle, a chair with a broken leg, and a framed family photo. In the stillness, each camera click echoed softly, breaking the quiet like stones thrown into still water. I eventually turned toward the narrow staircase tucked into the corner of the main room. Dust covered the steps thickly, undisturbed for decades. As I placed my foot on the first step, the wood groaned beneath me, startlingly loud against the house's deep silence. I hesitated, holding my breath, listening intently. Nothing. Convincing myself it was just the aging wood, I moved up another step, carefully this time. Another creak, deeper, more resonant, echoed from above. I paused again, heart rate picking up slightly. Suddenly, clearly and deliberately, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy steps pacing across the floorboards directly above me. I stood frozen, my rational mind frantically trying to explain away the sounds. It was impossible that anyone else was here. I was utterly alone, miles from another living soul. Yet there they were, unmistakably human footsteps. Then came a loud thud, forceful enough to vibrate through the ceiling and down my spine. My instincts took over. Rational thought abandoned me, replaced by raw, primal fear. I spun around, leaping down the stairs in 2 strides, nearly tripping as adrenaline surged through my veins. Bursting out the front door into the cold afternoon air, I ran without looking back, legs pounding through moss and marsh until my lungs burned and I finally reached the defender. I threw myself inside, locked the doors and sat panting, watching the distant farmhouse through the windshield. It stood silent and still, offering no answers. When I finally calmed enough to inspect my camera's photographs, my fingers trembled. Flicking through images, I paused at the last picture, taken just before I ascended the stairs. At the very top of the staircase, blurred yet unmistakably present, was a dark silhouette. Someone or something had been watching me. I spent a restless night parked far from the farmhouse, wrapped in my sleeping bag inside the Defender. The rhythmic drumming of rain and the shrill whistle of wind battered against the vehicle's roof, keeping sleep distant and uneasy. By morning, the storm had subsided, but the cold persisted, creeping through the gaps in the windows. Shivering, I tried turning the key in the ignition, desperate to move farther away from that place. But the engine only sputtered helplessly, refusing to start. My frustration mounted with each failed attempt, accompanied by the sinking realization that without cell service and miles from civilization, I had few options. After half an hour of futile efforts, I resigned myself to the grim reality. I needed supplies to attempt repairs. Tools, wiring, anything salvageable from that abandoned farmhouse would be better than nothing. Every rational part of me protested the idea of returning, yet desperation made it impossible to ignore. Steeling myself against lingering anxiety, I trudged back through the damp, cold landscape toward the farmhouse. My boots squelched loudly through the waterlogged earth, and with each step closer, tension tightened in my chest. As the structure reappeared through the mist, it felt more forbidding than before, colder somehow, though the temperature hadn't changed. Its dark windows reflected nothing but gray skies, revealing no hint of what waited inside. Taking a deep breath, I stepped once again through the creaking front door. Inside, the chill bit deeper than before, seeping into my bones. The air had grown heavy with moisture overnight, and the faint metallic scent that I'd noticed yesterday was now stronger, mingling unsettlingly with the smell of mold and decay. Carefully, I moved toward the staircase again, eyes darting between shadows. I knew the upper floor would be my best chance at finding spare wiring or scrap metal. On the second floor, my flashlight illuminated several small rooms, empty except for scattered debris and dusty sheets draped over broken furniture. In one room, burn marks formed strange spiraling patterns on the walls, stark and deliberate. I moved on quickly, suppressing the discomfort growing in my gut. In the hallway, peeling wallpaper caught my attention. Beneath the faded paper, deep carvings marred the wooden planks, etched crudely in circular designs and overlapping spirals. The gouges looked frantic, almost obsessive. Nearby, the largest bedroom had walls darkened with charcoal scribblings, repeated phrases scrawled hastily. "They are in the attic. He watches at night." My pulse quickened, and my throat tightened. The cryptic phrases amplified the unease I'd tried to suppress. I moved backward into the hall, glancing upward instinctively. That's when I noticed the attic hatch in the ceiling, slightly ajar. A narrow gap of darkness yawned open, and I felt certain it had been shut when I fled the previous afternoon. As I stood staring, Paralyzed by dread and uncertainty, I heard it again, the low, dragging scuffle directly above me. A heartbeat later, another heavy, deliberate thud shook the ceiling boards, sending dust drifting slowly down into the beam of my flashlight. Panic surged. I spun toward the staircase, determined to escape before whatever was up there decided to come down. But as I reached the stairs, my feet froze. The wooden steps, previously thick with undisturbed dust, were now covered in fresh tracks. Bare footprints, smeared in mud, descended step by step toward the lower floor. The prints were too large to belong to a child, the soles broad and flat, each one perfectly formed. They ended abruptly at the base of the stairs, as if whoever had left them simply vanished or stood waiting, unseen. Heart hammering in my chest, I edged forward, fighting the impulse to sprint wildly and risk falling. Each step down the staircase felt like a lifetime, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I scanned the room below. Empty, silent, yet charged with an oppressive sense of watchfulness. Stepping onto the ground floor, I bolted for the door, stumbling out onto the bluff. My eyes rose involuntarily to the attic window, drawn by an unshakable feeling of being observed. Behind the dirty glass, for a brief, terrible moment, I glimpsed movement, a shadow shifting just out of sight. Turning away sharply, I ran back toward the vehicle without hesitation, refusing to glance back again, no longer caring about repairs or solutions. My only thought now was to get as far away as possible from whatever lived unseen in the dark spaces of that farmhouse. The storm returned in earnest, fierce gusts pelting the Defender with rain and salt spray from the nearby ocean. For hours I sat huddled in the cold, periodically turning the key, hoping the engine might finally sputter to life. It never did. Darkness closed around me, the oppressive blackness broken only by the feeble glow of my flashlight. As temperatures dropped, reality set in. I was trapped, exposed, and rapidly losing options. Despite every fiber of my being urging me not to, I knew the farmhouse was my best chance for shelter. Gathering a few essentials, flashlight, extra batteries, water, I forced myself out into the wind-whipped night and began the agonizing trek back to the house. Each step felt heavier than the last, an instinctive dread building relentlessly inside my chest. When I arrived, the building loomed larger in the darkness, silhouetted against a low, cloud-choked sky. Rain hammered against its wooden walls, filling the air with a relentless roar. Steeling my nerves, I pushed through the front door. Inside, the cold was piercing, soaking into my clothes. Shadows stretched in every direction as my flashlight cast trembling beams across the room. I hesitated near the staircase, remembering the muddy footprints in the attic above. My heart pounded at the thought of climbing those stairs again, but curiosity and fear had merged into a stubborn need for answers. Slowly, step by step, I ascended, senses straining for any hint of sound. On the second floor, I paused beneath the attic hatch, forcing my breath into slow, steady rhythms. Reaching upward, I gripped the wooden panel and tugged it open. The hatch swung downward, revealing a pitch-black void above. I shined my flashlight upward, illuminating narrow wooden rafters and thick beams tangled with cobwebs. Climbing carefully into the attic crawl space, I inhaled sharply. The beam of my flashlight landed on something disturbing tucked away in the far corner. A small, burned mattress blackened by soot and time. Crouched down, I leaned forward for a closer look. Resting atop it was a bundle wrapped tightly in wool fabric and rusted barbed wire. A sinking dread filled my gut. Gingerly pulling the cloth away, I recoiled sharply. Inside lay a collection of charred bones, small, brittle, and undoubtedly human. My breath came in rapid, shallow gasps as I backed away, accidentally kicking something solid. A weathered leather notebook lay half hidden under the mattress. Hands shaking, I opened the pages. Damp and mildewed, the handwriting was difficult but not impossible to decipher. I skimmed entries from someone named Thorvaldur, dated decades earlier. The earliest pages described mundane farm life, but the tone soon darkened into despair and paranoia. I cannot leave. They refuse to let me go. I hear them whispering from above. I've burned them again and again, but they always return. Feeding them has done nothing. They demand more. The final page was a frantic scribble, repeating a single desperate line. They never leave. I shut the notebook sharply, a cold sweat tracing my spine. Suddenly, I heard movement. A distinct, unmistakable shifting from the darkest corner of the attic, just beyond my flashlight's beam. Turning quickly, my heart surged into my throat as the attic hatch slammed shut behind me with a violent crash. I scrambled across the floorboards, pulse roaring in my ears, hands desperately clawing at the hatch. It wouldn't budge, locked inexplicably tight from beneath. Then another sound reached me, a low, scraping movement growing louder, closer. Fueled by pure panic, I kicked at the hatch repeatedly, each impact reverberating through my bones. Finally, the wood splintered, cracking open enough for me to shove it aside. Dropping through the gap, I crashed onto the hallway floor, flashlight spinning away into darkness. Stumbling to my feet, I sprinted through the farmhouse without stopping, pushing blindly through the front door and into the furious storm. Wind lashed at my face as I sprinted toward the distant road, not daring a glance behind. After 2 days of wandering, cold and nearly delirious, I was finally rescued by a road crew surveying storm damage. Weeks later, back in Reykjavik, I attempted to recover my photographs. The files from inside the farmhouse were corrupted, blank, nothing remained of my nightmarish encounter. Obsessed with finding some explanation, I posted on an Icelandic history forum. Days later, a local historian replied with a chilling message. That farmhouse burned down completely in the mid-1980s. Only ruins remain. There's nothing left standing on that bluff. Unable to believe it, I checked satellite images again and again. The maps confirmed his words. Nothing was left but a weathered stone outline swallowed by grass and wind. Yet in my dreams, I still see it clearly. That farmhouse, alone on the bluff, and the dark attic window staring silently back. I've explored a lot of abandoned buildings over the years. Warehouses, hospitals, old factories. Each place has its own unique story to tell. My friend Marcus and I love photography, and these forgotten spaces often offer the perfect backdrop. But when Marcus suggested we check out the old Pecco Delaware station in Fishtown, Philadelphia, I hesitated. I'd heard stories about that place, how massive and deteriorating it was, with floors partially submerged in murky water. Still, curiosity won out. It always does. The Delaware station loomed ahead of us as we approached from the rear, its brick walls weathered and scarred, windows shattered, like the hollow eyes of a skull. The only entry point we found was a heavy steel door, a grave-like slab rusted open just wide enough to squeeze through sideways. Marcus went first, sliding his backpack through before following, grunting from the effort. I slipped in right after. Inside, the air was stale and thick, tinged with rust and decay. Our footsteps echoed loudly as we moved cautiously into the cavernous space, the ground littered with chunks of concrete and broken machinery. Towering turbine housings stood rusting along one wall, giant relics from another era. We took our time setting up shots, capturing the peeling paint, twisted metal staircases, and graffiti-covered walls. After about 2 hours of exploring and photographing, we decided it was time to go. Dusk was approaching, and the fading light turned the building's shadows into pools of ink-black darkness. We retraced our steps carefully, laughing quietly about how jumpy we'd both gotten inside this eerie relic. When we reached the heavy steel door, Marcus suddenly stopped in his tracks. "It's closed," he whispered urgently, his voice tinged with anxiety. I pushed past him, staring at the door in disbelief. Sure enough, it was locked, sealed shut with a brand new padlock that gleamed incongruously against the rust. My heart rate picked up. "This wasn't here when we came in." Marcus nudged me nervously. "Look over there." I followed his gaze and saw a white van parked quietly inside the building. It definitely hadn't been there earlier. The sight of the vehicle sent a chill straight through me. "Someone's here," Marcus muttered. Almost as if in response, a loud metallic clang echoed through the cavernous space. We both jumped, the sound sharp and ringing. Then silence, heavy and oppressive, descended again. Marcus flicked on his flashlight, casting frantic beams into the shadows. "Who's there?" he called hesitantly. No answer, just another sharp clang, rhythmic and deliberate. We followed the unsettling noise through a maze of corridors, moving cautiously around corners and through archways. Finally, our beams caught sight of a figure hunched near a broken control panel, repeatedly striking a rusted pipe with a small ball-peen hammer. I froze. Marcus called out hesitantly, "Hey, excuse me, did you lock the door?" The man stopped mid-swing. He turned slowly toward us, revealing a gaunt face, pale and grimy, his eyes wide and unsettling in the flashlight beam. His mouth curled into an odd, humorless grin. "Yes," he said simply, his voice scratchy, almost amused. I stepped forward slightly, struggling to sound calm. "Can you please unlock it? It's the only way out." His smile faded abruptly. "No," he growled, low and threatening. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly. "Look, if you don't unlock it, we'll call the police. You can't just—" The man abruptly raised the hammer, his knuckles white from gripping it tightly. "You kids better leave this building quick," he snarled. The menace in his voice was undeniable. Fear exploded inside me. Without another word, Marcus and I turned and ran blindly back the way we'd come, the man's chilling laughter echoing behind us. We sprinted deeper into the building, pulse hammering in my ears, flashlight beams darting frantically around as we descended toward the pitch-black, partially flooded lower floors, desperately hoping to find another exit. The shadows seemed to deepen with every step, and the echoes of our footsteps sounded louder, sharper. Behind every corner, I half expected to see him standing there, waiting with that hammer raised, ready to strike. We stumbled down the stairs, breath ragged, hearts thumping painfully in our chests. Marcus's flashlight beam danced erratically over rusted metal rails and stained concrete walls, leading us deeper into the building's belly. Each turn took us further away from the man with the hammer, but deeper into darkness and uncertainty. My throat felt tight, my hands clammy. "Think he's following us?" Marcus whispered, his voice unsteady. I listened intently, pausing for just a moment. The silence felt absolute, broken only by the steady drip of water somewhere ahead. "I don't know," I finally said, "but we need to keep moving." We pressed on through corridors that gradually sloped downward, the air growing colder and more humid. The floors beneath us grew damp, slick with condensation. Soon, shallow pools of water appeared, collecting in cracks and uneven dips in the concrete. Marcus shone his flashlight down a long corridor and swallowed hard. "It's flooded." Ahead lay a passage partially submerged in stagnant water. A faint, acrid smell hung in the air, making my stomach churn. We hesitated, glancing nervously behind us. The way back was blocked. The only option was forward. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the water, cringing as it filled my shoes and rose swiftly to my ankles. Marcus followed reluctantly, murmuring curses under his breath. Each step stirred the thick muck beneath, releasing a musty, sulfurous odor. My imagination ran wild. I tried not to think about what might be lurking unseen beneath the murky surface. "Something brushed my leg," Marcus whispered suddenly, his voice sharp with alarm. He froze, flashlight beam wavering. "It's probably nothing. Just keep moving," I urged quietly, fighting the urge to panic. Ahead, a doorway led into a room cluttered with ancient equipment, now rusting and decayed. Marcus's flashlight swept across the walls, revealing graffiti intermingled with strange symbols I didn't recognize, sharp lines, circles, and jagged angles. I'd seen plenty of tags before, but these marks felt intentional and unsettling. Marcus stopped abruptly, his flashlight fixed on a cluster of small objects arranged neatly atop an old metal table. I joined him, staring down in confusion. Spread across the surface were various items: wallets, cell phones, car keys, a wristwatch. My stomach twisted uncomfortably. Marcus picked up a cracked smartphone. Its screen flickered weakly, showing a missed call notification dated nearly 2 years ago. "These look like they belong to someone," he whispered hoarsely. I reached out and picked up a mold-covered backpack, unzipping it carefully. Inside was a student ID. I wiped the grime from the faded picture. A smiling young woman's face stared back at me. My breath caught in my throat as recognition hit me. "I saw her on the news," I said quietly. "She went missing a couple years ago. They never found her." Marcus's eyes widened in horror. We exchanged a silent, dreadful look, both of us realizing simultaneously that these items hadn't simply been lost. They had been taken. A sudden sound echoed through the hallway behind us, sharp and metallic, the unmistakable clang of metal striking concrete. Marcus jerked his flashlight toward the door we'd entered through, his hand shaking. The sound came again, closer this time. Heavy footsteps splashed through the flooded corridor behind us, deliberate and relentless. Panic surged through me like electricity. "Go now," I hissed urgently. We bolted from the room, water splashing wildly around our legs as we ran deeper into the building. Marcus's flashlight beam bobbed chaotically, illuminating shadowy corridors filled with debris and rusted machinery. My lungs burned with exertion and fear, the taste of panic bitter in my mouth. We rounded another corner, then another, before reaching an old rust-stained maintenance door set into the concrete wall. Marcus grabbed the handle and pulled hard, but it didn't budge. I pushed against the metal frame with him, muscles straining, desperately trying to force it open. Behind us, the footsteps slowed, then stopped altogether. A voice drifted from the darkness, low and almost whispering. "You shouldn't have come this far down." I felt my body seize with terror as Marcus and I pushed desperately against the rusted door. It creaked agonizingly slow, metal grinding against concrete. Finally, with one last desperate shove, it groaned open into a pitch-black tunnel beyond. Without hesitation, we slipped inside, closing the heavy door behind us, hoping, praying, it would buy us enough time to find another way out. The tunnel stretched into pitch darkness, the air thick with mold and the lingering odor of decay. My headlamp flickered weakly, barely illuminating the narrow concrete corridor ahead. Marcus followed closely, his breathing ragged, each footstep echoing sharply off the walls. Behind us, the heavy metal door remained shut, but I couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment it might swing open, the old man appearing with his hammer raised high. We pressed forward, adrenaline driving us on through twists and turns that felt like a maze beneath the power plant. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting a silhouette emerging from the shadows. Each time there was nothing, just darkness swallowing the beam of Marcus's flashlight. Ahead, the floor dipped suddenly, descending into a stairwell littered with rusted debris and chunks of concrete. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, pooling at the bottom of the steps, forming a stagnant, filthy puddle. Marcus's flashlight illuminated a hatch set into the floor, crusted with moss and corrosion. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. "Help me," Marcus whispered urgently, his voice trembling. He knelt beside the hatch, gripping the rusted handle and pulling with all his strength. I joined him, fingers slipping against the cold metal, desperation fueling every movement. Behind us came a sound that made my blood freeze, the slow, wet slap of bare feet moving steadily across the concrete. The footsteps sounded distorted, uneven, nothing like the purposeful strides of the man with the hammer. Marcus froze, staring wide-eyed into the darkness behind us, his flashlight wavering unsteadily. "What is that?" he hissed, voice breaking. "I don't want to find out," I said through clenched teeth. "Pull." Together we strained, muscles burning, panic growing as the footsteps drew closer. Finally, the hatch gave way with a sudden grating screech, revealing another dark passage below. Marcus dropped through immediately, landing roughly on damp ground below. I followed, pulling the hatch closed behind us as quickly as I could. We found ourselves in a partially collapsed loading area. Rusted machinery lay strewn about, partially buried beneath piles of bricks and splintered wood. The air here was fresher, hinting at freedom nearby. Marcus pointed frantically toward a sliver of fading daylight visible through a gap in the collapsed wall. "Over there!" We scrambled over rubble, scraping palms and shins on jagged metal and broken concrete, desperate now to reach the outside. The gap was narrow, barely large enough for us to squeeze through, but we forced ourselves through anyway, jackets snagging, skin tearing against the sharp edges. Finally, we emerged, gasping, into a dim, weed-choked alley behind the power plant. Cool air filled my lungs, painfully sharp but incredibly welcome. Marcus bent over, hands on his knees, coughing violently. I leaned against the building's crumbling exterior, breathing hard, my entire body shaking with exhaustion and fear. When I raised my eyes again, my stomach sank. Across the alley, parked facing toward us, sat the same white van from inside the power plant. Standing beside it was the old man, hammer still in hand, watching us silently. His expression revealed nothing, no anger, no urgency, only a chilling stillness. He didn't move forward, didn't call out. He just watched us with those cold, unsettling eyes. Marcus straightened slowly, noticing him too. Without a word exchanged, we backed slowly away, eyes never leaving the figure at the van. He made no attempt to follow, nor did he shift his stance. He simply stood there, hammer dangling loosely by his side, watching as we stumbled backward into the fading twilight. We didn't stop moving until we reached the main street, illuminated by streetlights and passing cars. Only then did I realize how badly I was trembling. Marcus looked pale, shell-shocked, his eyes wide and haunted. Days later, another friend of ours, Jules, insisted on exploring the plant himself after hearing our account. He emerged safely but mentioned he'd seen the same man. Jules said the old guy didn't speak or chase him, only followed quietly, hammer swinging loosely at his side. I reported everything to the police, but they dismissed our account as just another exaggerated urban explorer story. They didn't care, didn't believe. Not until a few weeks later when another name appeared on the missing persons list, a teenager last seen near the power plant. Sometimes late at night, I think about what we saw down there. The scattered belongings, the strange symbols on the walls, the figure that moved quietly behind us in the flooded halls, and I wonder how long that man has been inside that building, and what else might still be lurking within its dark, hidden depths.